Deep in the hollers of Appalachia, where ancient mountains hold secrets darker than the coal buried beneath them, there are stories that most people will never hear. If you're ready to uncover the twisted history and disturbing mysteries hidden in these hills, smash that subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell, because the content we explore on this channel isn't for the faint of heart. Welcome to Boring Nightmares, where we dive into the shadows of Appalachian folklore, true crime, and the strange phenomena that mainstream media won't touch. Deep in the hollers of eastern Kentucky, where cell phone towers dare not reach and GPS signals mysteriously fail, there exists a family that authorities have been actively concealing from public knowledge for over 3 decades. Their story begins in 1987 with a desperate bargain made during the coldest winter in Appalachian memory, but what they received in exchange for their survival has made them too dangerous for the outside world to ever find. The Whitmore family of Bone Creek Valley represents something that challenges our understanding of what's possible in the modern world. Federal agencies maintain a 20-mile exclusion zone around their territory, disguised as environmental protection for an endangered species that doesn't exist. Satellite imagery of their location is deliberately corrupted, showing only static and impossible geographical features. Local maps omit their valley entirely, and hiking trails that once led to their settlement have been permanently closed and overgrown. But the real question isn't where they are, it's what they've become, and why 3 separate government agencies coordinate their concealment with resources typically reserved for national security threats. The answer lies in understanding what desperation can drive people to accept, and what certain entities dwelling in America's oldest mountains are willing to offer in exchange for something far more valuable than money. The winter of 1987 nearly killed the Whitmores. Samuel Whitmore, his pregnant wife Rachel, and their 4 children faced starvation in a cabin that barely kept out the bitter mountain wind. Samuel had lost his job at the coal mine when it closed without warning, leaving dozens of families with no income and nowhere to go. Their savings had been consumed by medical bills for their youngest son, who suffered from a rare blood disorder that required expensive treatments they could no longer afford. As the family's food supplies dwindled to nothing and the nearest town lay 40 miles away through impassable snow, Samuel made a decision that would alter the course of his bloodline forever. Local folklore spoke of entities that dwelt in the deepest parts of the mountains, ancient things that predated human settlement and occasionally offered assistance to those desperate enough to seek them out. These weren't the cheerful mountain spirits of children's tales, but something far older and more complex, beings that understood the true value of human desperation. On the night of December 21st, during a blizzard that trapped the family completely, Samuel ventured into the woods behind their cabin, following directions whispered by his grandfather decades earlier. He found the place where 3 unnamed creeks converged around a formation of black stones arranged in a perfect circle, stones that remained warm to the touch despite the freezing temperatures. In the center of this circle stood a single tree, leafless and apparently dead, its branches twisted into patterns that hurt to look at directly. Samuel later described what happened next as less of a conversation and more of an understanding that flowed directly into his mind. The presence he encountered offered survival for his family, prosperity that would last for generations, and protection from the harsh realities of mountain life. The cost was simple. The Whitmores would become caretakers of something that required human oversight, guardians of a responsibility that would bind them to the mountain forever. The bargain was struck with a handshake Samuel would never fully remember, but the effects were immediate. The blizzard stopped within hours, and when Samuel returned to the cabin, he found his family's pantry mysteriously restocked with food that would last until spring. More importantly, their sick child's condition began improving overnight, his blood disorder seemingly curing itself in ways that baffled the doctors they would later consult. By spring, the changes became more apparent. Samuel discovered an unusual talent for finding things, valuable things that others had lost or forgotten. Old mining equipment buried in the hills, forgotten caches of money hidden by previous generations, even precious metals that appeared in creek beds after heavy rains. The family's financial troubles vanished as Samuel's discoveries provided a steady income that attracted no unwanted attention from tax authorities or curious neighbors. But the most significant change was in the family members themselves. The Whitmores began exhibiting abilities that defied explanation. They could sense approaching weather days in advance, predict landslides and flash floods with uncanny accuracy, and navigate the treacherous mountain terrain in complete darkness without ever losing their way. Their physical health improved dramatically, with injuries healing faster than normal and illnesses rarely lasting more than a day. More unusual was their developing connection to the mountain's wildlife. Animals that typically avoided human contact began approaching the Whitmore property, not in fear but almost in reverence. Bears would graze peacefully near their cabin, mountain lions would watch from respectful distances, and even typically aggressive wild boars seemed to recognize the family as something different from ordinary humans. The first government attention came in 1989 when a geological survey team investigating unusual mineral readings in the area reported several impossible encounters with the Whitmore family. The team's equipment, designed to detect underground formations and mineral deposits, began registering readings that suggested massive metallic structures deep beneath the mountain, structures that couldn't possibly exist naturally and were far too large to be man-made. When the survey team approached the Whitmore cabin, seeking permission to investigate their property, they encountered something that fundamentally changed their understanding of what was possible. The family members they met appeared normal at first glance, but displayed knowledge and abilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Young children spoke with the wisdom of elders, discussing geological formations and weather patterns with expertise that would have impressed university professors. Most disturbing was their apparent ability to influence electronic equipment through proximity alone. The survey team's instruments, carefully calibrated and functioning perfectly moments before, began displaying impossible readings in the presence of family members. Compasses spun wildly, radiation detectors registered massive fluctuations despite no apparent source, and communication devices produced sounds that resembled voices speaking in unknown languages. The team's final report, classified within hours of submission, described the Whitmores as exhibiting characteristics that suggested either advanced technology far beyond current human capabilities, or exposure to phenomena that challenged fundamental scientific principles. More concerning was their apparent awareness of information they couldn't possibly possess, including details about the survey team's personal lives, classified government projects, and events occurring hundreds of miles away. Within weeks of this report, the first federal agents arrived in the area, ostensibly investigating reports of illegal mining operations. What they discovered led to the establishment of the exclusion zone that remains in effect today. The agents found that the Whitmore family had become something that existing government protocols couldn't adequately address, beings that retained human appearance and intelligence while possessing capabilities that posed potential risks to national security. The family's ability to predict natural disasters with perfect accuracy had evolved into something more concerning. They appeared to influence these events through unknown means. Droughts would break within hours of family members expressing concern about local water supplies. Dangerous weather systems would mysteriously dissipate before reaching populated areas when the Whitmores deemed them threatening. Most unsettling, they seemed capable of detecting and neutralizing potential threats to their territory before those threats became active. Federal investigators discovered that the family had been quietly preventing disasters throughout the region for years, intervening in ways that saved countless lives while leaving no evidence of their involvement. Forest fires would mysteriously extinguish themselves. Avalanches would occur in empty areas rather than threatening populated zones, and flash floods would be diverted into channels that minimized damage to human settlements. This benevolent intervention presented authorities with an unprecedented dilemma. The Whitmore family's activities clearly benefited the region and its inhabitants, but their methods defied understanding, and their capabilities suggested access to forces that could potentially be weaponized if they chose to use them aggressively. The decision was made to monitor and contain rather than confront, establishing the exclusion zone as a compromise that protected both the family's privacy and national security interests. The official explanation for the restricted area cited concerns about endangered species habitat, specifically a rare subspecies of woodland caribou that existed nowhere else on Earth. Environmental protection agencies issued detailed studies documenting this fictional species, complete with fabricated behavioral patterns and habitat requirements that justified permanent human exclusion from the valley. Satellite imagery of the area is routinely altered to show only dense forest canopy, concealing whatever structures or activities exist within the valley. The few authorized overflights conducted by military aircraft have yielded photographs that intelligence analysts describe as impossible, showing geographical features that appear to shift between viewings and structures that don't conform to known architectural principles. The handful of individuals who have encountered the Whitmore family in recent years describe them as having evolved beyond their original human appearance while retaining recognizable human characteristics. They move with fluid grace that suggests perfect integration with their mountain environment, communicate through combinations of spoken language and methods that bypass normal hearing, and demonstrate awareness of events occurring far beyond the range of normal human perception. These witnesses, primarily federal agents and researchers with appropriate security clearances, report that the Whitmores have established a sustainable community within their valley that operates according to principles that blend advanced understanding of natural systems with technologies that appear to be biological rather than mechanical in nature. Their dwellings seem to grow from the landscape itself. Their food production systems work in perfect harmony with local ecosystems, and their energy sources leave no detectable environmental impact. Most significantly, the family appears to have developed a form of collective consciousness that allows individual members to access the knowledge and experiences of the entire group. Children born into the community emerge with capabilities that would require decades of training to develop naturally, while older members seem to possess accumulated wisdom that spans far beyond their individual lifespans. The government's continued concealment of the Whitmore family stems not from any threat they pose to public safety, but from the implications their existence would have for established scientific and social paradigms. Their abilities suggest possibilities for human development that would fundamentally challenge current understanding of biology, consciousness, and humanity's relationship with natural systems. Recent reports from monitoring stations around the exclusion zone indicate that the family's influence continues to expand gradually. Unusual weather patterns beneficial to regional agriculture, mysterious improvements in local water quality, and the unexpected return of wildlife species thought extinct in the area all suggest ongoing intervention by the Whitmores in ways that enhance rather than disrupt natural systems. The most recent intelligence suggests that the family has been quietly establishing connections with other isolated communities throughout Appalachia, sharing knowledge and capabilities that could eventually transform entire regions. This development has prompted increased surveillance and consideration of more direct intervention, though authorities remain uncertain about the potential consequences of disrupting whatever process the Whitmores are facilitating. What began as a desperate bargain during a harsh winter has evolved into something that challenges fundamental assumptions about human potential and our relationship with forces that exist beyond current scientific understanding. The Whitmore family represents not a threat to be contained, but a possibility that authorities are not yet prepared to acknowledge, let alone explain to a public that might not be ready to accept what humanity could become under different circumstances. The exclusion zone remains in effect, the satellite imagery continues to be altered, and the maps still omit their valley. The question everyone refuses to ask is simple. What happens when a government agency finds something they can't explain, can't control, and absolutely cannot let the public discover? The answer lies buried in classified reports, sealed testimonies, and the desperate measures taken to contain the Whitmore situation in eastern Kentucky. By 1995, 8 years after that first winter contact, federal monitoring had escalated from casual observation to active containment. What began as a single family's survival pact had evolved into something that challenged every assumption about human potential and the nature of reality itself. The children born after 1987 were exhibiting capabilities that defied scientific understanding, and their parents had undergone transformations that made regular human contact increasingly impossible. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurobiologist recruited by an unnamed federal task force, spent 3 months studying the Whitmore phenomenon from a secure observation post 12 miles from their territory. Her leaked research notes, obtained through a source who requested anonymity, reveal the true scope of what authorities discovered. The Whitmores weren't just surviving in isolation. They were thriving in ways that seemed to violate basic laws of physics and biology. The family's metabolic rates had decreased by nearly 60%, allowing them to sustain themselves on minimal food while maintaining extraordinary physical capabilities. Their reaction times tested at levels impossible for normal humans, with some family members demonstrating response speeds that approached the theoretical limits of neural transmission. Most disturbing were the collective episodes, moments when all family members would simultaneously stop their individual activities and move in perfect coordination toward a common goal, as if controlled by a single consciousness. Dr. Chen's notes describe watching through high-powered telescopes as the family worked together to redirect a flash flood that threatened their valley. Without any apparent communication, they positioned themselves at strategic points along the creek bed, using tools and techniques that seemed to anticipate the water's movement with impossible precision. The flood, which meteorologists had predicted would devastate the area, was channeled harmlessly around their settlement and neighboring wildlife habitats. But it was the children that truly alarmed federal observers. Born after their parents' transformation, these new Whitmores exhibited abilities from birth that suggested fundamental genetic alterations. They demonstrated echolocation comparable to dolphins, could navigate in complete darkness with perfect accuracy, and showed no fear of dangerous wildlife that fled from their presence. By age 5, they were communicating in a mixture of spoken English and what the federal response escalated when satellite surveillance detected impossible architectural structures on Whitmore property. Underground chambers extended far deeper than any family could excavate by hand, with perfectly smooth walls that reflected no light and chambers that appeared to maintain constant temperatures regardless of external weather conditions. Ground-penetrating radar revealed spaces that existed in configurations that violated basic geometric principles, with rooms that appeared larger inside than their external dimensions could accommodate. More troubling were the technological anomalies surrounding the family's territory. Electronic equipment malfunctioned within a 5-mile radius of their settlement, with digital devices displaying impossible readings and mechanical instruments producing results that contradicted physical laws. Military-grade surveillance equipment would function normally until pointed toward Whitmore land, at which point cameras would show only static and recording devices would capture sounds that seemed to originate from underground, despite no known cave systems in the area. The exclusion zone established in 1992 was officially justified as protection for the critically endangered Appalachian smoky salamander, a species that conveniently existed only in government databases. In reality, the 20-mile restricted area served as a buffer zone designed to prevent civilian contact with a family that could no longer be considered entirely human. Federal personnel manning the checkpoints were rotated every 30 days and subjected to psychological evaluations after each assignment, with many reporting disturbing dreams and an overwhelming compulsion to abandon their posts and walk toward the mountains. Local residents who had lived in the region for generations began reporting changes that coincided with the Whitmore transformation. Wildlife behavior shifted dramatically, with typically territorial species coexisting peacefully and migration patterns altering to funnel animals toward the restricted zone. Springs that had run dry for decades suddenly flowed with water that tested purer than any natural source should be possible. Most unnervingly, people living within 50 miles of the Whitmore territory began experiencing shared dreams, vivid nocturnal visions of vast underground chambers filled with soft light and the sound of voices singing in harmonies that seemed to resonate in their bones. Dr. Chen's final report, dated 3 days before her mysterious disappearance, contained observations that her superiors immediately classified at the highest levels. She described witnessing the Whitmore family engaged in what she termed environmental integration activities that suggested they were no longer merely living in their mountain ecosystem, but actively becoming part of it. Family members would spend hours motionless against tree trunks, their skin taking on bark-like textures, or partially submerged in streams, with their breathing slowing to match the rhythm of flowing water. The children demonstrated even more dramatic integration capabilities. Dr. Chen observed them spending entire nights underground, emerging at dawn with soil-stained skin and detailed knowledge of geological formations miles beneath the surface. They spoke of the mountain's deep thoughts and claimed to understand the slow conversations between stone and root system networks that extended throughout the Appalachian range. Perhaps most disturbing was Dr. Chen's description of the family's apparent ability to influence weather patterns on a regional scale. Her instruments detected localized atmospheric changes that preceded major weather events by several days, with the modifications seeming to originate from the Whitmore settlement. Droughts would break with precisely targeted rainfall that nourished crops while avoiding areas prone to flooding. Severe storms would dissipate or change direction in ways that meteorologists couldn't explain, following paths that protected both human communities and wildlife habitats. The federal task force faced an unprecedented dilemma. The Whitmore family posed no direct threat to national security. Indeed, their influence seemed entirely benevolent. Regional disaster rates had dropped dramatically since their transformation, and ecological surveys showed that their territory supported biodiversity levels unseen elsewhere in Appalachia. Yet their very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature, consciousness, and the relationship between intelligence and physical reality. Attempts to establish direct contact proved impossible. Federal agents who ventured too close to the family's settlement would experience severe disorientation, losing hours of time and emerging from the forest with no memory of their approach. Some reported feeling welcomed by an overwhelming sense of peace and belonging, while others described an oppressive awareness of being observed by something vast and ancient that existed just beyond the edge of perception. The few successful long-range observations revealed a family that had developed beyond recognition. Adult Whitmores had grown taller and more angular, their movements displaying an eerie synchronization with natural rhythms. Their eyes had developed a reflective quality that made them appear luminous in low light, and their skin showed patterns of coloration that seemed to shift with seasons and emotional states. They rarely spoke in the presence of observers, communicating instead through gesture expression, and the subsonic vocalizations that seemed to carry far more information than spoken language. Most unsettling was their apparent awareness of being watched. Despite sophisticated concealment techniques, the family would occasionally turn toward hidden observation posts and acknowledge federal surveillance with gestures that seemed both greeting and dismissal. Dr. Chen noted that these acknowledgments were always accompanied by a sense of profound sadness, as if the family mourned the necessity of their isolation while understanding its inevitability. The children born in the years following 1987 showed even more dramatic adaptations. By adolescence, they demonstrated capabilities that existing science couldn't explain: healing from injuries at accelerated rates, surviving in harsh conditions that would kill normal humans, and displaying problem-solving abilities that suggested access to information beyond their individual experience. They seemed to operate as extensions of a collective intelligence while maintaining distinct personalities and preferences. Dr. Chen's research suggested that the Whitmore transformation wasn't random mutation, but rather an accelerated evolutionary adaptation triggered by their original bargain. Whatever entity or force they had encountered in that desperate winter had somehow activated dormant genetic potential, allowing rapid adaptation to environmental challenges while maintaining essential human consciousness and values. The family had become something new while remaining fundamentally themselves. Federal authorities ultimately concluded that the Whitmore situation represented a controlled evolution that posed no immediate threat but could not be allowed to spread. The family's apparent contentment with isolation made containment feasible, while their benevolent influence on the regional ecosystem provided useful benefits that justified continued monitoring rather than intervention. Yet questions remained that haunted those tasked with studying the family. If the Whitmores could undergo such dramatic transformation while retaining their essential humanity, what did this suggest about human potential more generally? Were there other families, other communities that had made similar bargains in moments of desperation? And perhaps most troubling, what did the Whitmore transformation indicate about the nature of consciousness itself and the possibility that human awareness might be far more adaptable and expandable than anyone had previously imagined? The official policy became one of careful observation and absolute secrecy. The Whitmore family would be allowed to continue their evolution in isolation, protected by the exclusion zone, and monitored by rotating teams of specialists who were never allowed to remain in the area long enough to be affected by whatever force had transformed the original family. Their story would remain classified, their existence denied, and their example prevented from inspiring others who might seek similar transformations. But in the hollows and ridges of eastern Kentucky, changes continued to ripple outward from the Whitmore settlement. Wildlife populations flourished in patterns that defied ecological models. Springs ran cleaner, forests grew thicker, and the very air seemed to carry a quality of peace and vitality that visitors found both comforting and unsettling. The family had become gardeners of their landscape, tending to their mountain ecosystem with capabilities that transcended normal human limitations. As years passed, the exclusion zone became a pilgrimage site for those who somehow learned of its true purpose. Despite heavy security, people would arrive at the perimeter claiming to have received dreams or visions calling them to the mountains. Most were turned away, but their testimonies revealed a disturbing pattern. Across Appalachia and beyond, individuals reported shared dreams of underground chambers filled with soft light and voices that spoke of transformation, adaptation, and the possibility of becoming something more than merely human. The Whitmore family had survived their desperate winter, but in doing so, they had become something that challenged every assumption about the nature of human existence. They represented both promise and peril, a glimpse of potential evolution that authorities deemed too dangerous to acknowledge and too valuable to destroy. In their isolation, they continued to grow and change, becoming living proof that the boundaries between human and natural world were far more permeable than anyone had previously imagined. And in the deepest archives of government facilities, Dr. Chen's final report remains sealed, its contents deemed too sensitive for any but the highest security clearances. Her last observation, scrawled in handwriting that grew increasingly erratic, simply reads, "They're not becoming something other than human. They're becoming what humans were always meant to be, and they're not alone in the mountains." The evidence scattered across government databases tells a story that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. The Whitmore family's transformation from ordinary Appalachian settlers to something beyond current scientific understanding has forced federal agencies into unprecedented territory. While their initial abilities were remarkable enough to warrant protection and study, what has emerged over the past 15 years suggests their evolution is far from complete. Dr. Sarah Chen, a behavioral geneticist who worked on the classified Whitmore documentation project from 1999 to 2003, kept detailed personal notes that were discovered after her death in 2019. Her private journal, found sealed in a safe deposit box, reveals the true extent of what researchers observed during those crucial years when the family's capabilities began expanding beyond their original parameters. Day 847 of observation, Dr. Chen wrote in March 2001, "The collective consciousness phenomenon has evolved into something we didn't anticipate. The family members are no longer just sharing thoughts and emotions. They appear to be accessing information from sources we cannot identify. Yesterday, 8-year-old Thomas Whitmore described in perfect detail the internal structure of a nuclear reactor, complete with technical specifications that would challenge graduate-level nuclear engineers. The mountain remembers. This phrase appears repeatedly in classified reports, always spoken by different family members when asked about knowledge they shouldn't possess. Geological surveys of the area have revealed something that makes researchers deeply uncomfortable. The limestone formations beneath the Whitmore settlement contain cavern systems that extend far deeper than any previously mapped cave networks in the region. More disturbing, seismic readings suggest these caverns are not natural formations, but show signs of deliberate construction using methods that predate known human habitation of North America by thousands of years. Dr. Marcus Hoffman, a hydrologist who conducted water table studies in the area during 2004, reported finding underground streams that flow in patterns that defy basic physics. Water doesn't flow uphill, he noted in his official report. Yet we documented multiple instances of groundwater moving against gravity, forming circulation patterns that suggest the entire mountain operates as a single hydraulic system. The water itself contains mineral compositions that don't match any known geological processes. The purpose became clearer when researchers discovered that the Whitmore family's water supply comes exclusively from a spring that emerges directly from these anomalous underground systems. Chemical analysis of this water revealed it contains trace elements that exist nowhere else on Earth, compounds that seem to exist in a state of constant molecular flux. When samples were removed from the immediate area for laboratory analysis, they became inert within hours, returning to ordinary water with no unusual properties. But the water is only one component of what researchers now call the enhancement protocol. Soil samples from the Whitmore property show similar anomalies. The earth around their settlement contains microorganisms that display behavior patterns unlike any known bacteria or fungi. These organisms appear to form complex networks, almost like a biological internet, that connect not just across the immediate area, but extend throughout the entire mountain range. Doctor. The implications became terrifying when researchers realized the family's enhanced abilities weren't just genetic mutations, but the result of symbiotic relationships with these unknown organisms. Blood samples from family members showed the presence of the same microorganisms found in the soil and water, but in their human hosts, these organisms displayed even more sophisticated behaviors. They appeared to be actively modifying the family's DNA in real time, making adjustments that enhanced cognitive function, physical capabilities, and sensory perception as needed. We're not looking at evolution in the traditional sense, wrote Dr. Chen in her final journal entry. This is directed development. Something is guiding these changes, and it's not random mutation. The organisms in their bloodstream respond to environmental pressures and information needs by literally rewriting their genetic code. What that something might be became apparent when researchers began noticing changes in wildlife behavior throughout the broader Appalachian region. Animals that had never shown such behaviors began exhibiting increased intelligence and coordination. Migratory patterns shifted as birds began following routes that brought them closer to areas where similar underground systems were suspected. Predator and prey relationships changed as animals seemed to develop new methods of communication across species lines. The Whitmore family appeared to be connected to all of it. During a 2006 observation session, researchers watched as Martha Whitmore, now in her 70s but appearing decades younger, stood in her garden and began making a series of soft vocalizations that didn't match any known human language. Within minutes, animals throughout the surrounding forest began responding. Deer emerged from the tree line, birds descended from the canopy, and even typically nocturnal creatures like owls and raccoons appeared in broad daylight. They formed concentric circles around Martha, sitting completely still for nearly an hour while she continued her strange vocalizations. It wasn't just animal communication, reported Dr. Staven Park, a wildlife biologist who witnessed the event. The animals were clearly receiving complex information. After the session ended, they dispersed in organized patterns, heading to specific locations throughout the mountain range. We later discovered they had positioned themselves at sites where our geological surveys had identified other underground anomalies. This network appears to extend far beyond the immediate area. Satellite imagery analysis has revealed subtle but consistent changes in vegetation patterns across multiple states, all following lines that correspond to underground water systems similar to those found beneath the Whitmore settlement. These changes suggest that whatever is happening in eastern Kentucky is part of a much larger phenomenon that spans the entire Appalachian mountain chain. The family's role in this broader network became undeniable when researchers discovered they could influence weather patterns across vast distances. During the devastating drought of 2007, government meteorologists recorded impossible rainfall patterns that seemed to originate from the Whitmore area and spread outward in precise geometric formations. The rain fell exactly where it was most needed to prevent crop failures and forest fires, following patterns that would have required supercomputer modeling to achieve artificially. When questioned about these events, family members displayed the same serene confidence they had shown since the beginning. "The mountain provides what the land needs," explained Samuel Whitmore, now the family patriarch. But listening, researchers discovered involved capabilities that challenged the fundamental understanding of human consciousness. Brain scans of family members, conducted using portable equipment during rare moments when they permitted such examinations, showed neural activity patterns that shouldn't be possible with human brain structure. They were processing information at rates that exceeded the fastest supercomputers, and their brains showed evidence of quantum-level information processing that theoretical physicists had deemed impossible in biological systems. More disturbing was the discovery that these enhanced mental capabilities were accelerating. Each generation of children born to the family showed exponentially greater abilities than their parents. The youngest members, born after 2010, demonstrated powers that forced researchers to question the nature of reality itself. 10-year-old Rebecca Whitmore could apparently perceive electromagnetic fields directly, describing in detail the operation of electronic devices from hundreds of yards away. She could predict equipment failures days before they occurred and seemed to understand instinctively how to repair complex machinery she had never encountered before. When asked how she knew these things, she gave the same answer that had become standard among the younger family members. Everything has a song. The songs, it turns out, are quite literal. Advanced audio recording equipment hidden in the surrounding forest picked up subsonic frequencies emanating from the underground cavern systems. These sounds form complex patterns that repeat on cycles ranging from hours to months. When analyzed by cryptographers and linguists, the patterns showed characteristics of constructed languages, complete with grammatical structures and vocabulary that suggested sophisticated information content. The most unsettling discovery came when researchers realized that family members were not just receiving these underground transmissions, but actively contributing to them. During periods of deep meditation, which the family practiced collectively each evening, their brainwaves synchronized not just with each other, but with the subsonic frequencies from the caverns. They were participating in conversations with something that existed far beneath the surface of the mountain. Dr. Chen's final journal entry, written shortly before her death, provides the most disturbing insight into what researchers had discovered. "We've been approaching this wrong from the beginning. We assumed the family was being enhanced by some external force, that they were subjects of an experiment or beneficiaries of some natural phenomenon. But the evidence suggests something far more complex. They're not being changed by something in the mountain. They are becoming the mountain. The implications of this realization led to an immediate escalation in security protocols. If the family was indeed becoming something beyond human, something connected to a network that spanned the entire Appalachian range, then their potential influence could extend far beyond their immediate area. Contingency plans were developed for scenarios that ranged from benevolent guidance to potential existential threats to human civilization as we know it. Yet every interaction with the family continued to suggest their intentions remained purely benevolent. They showed no interest in expanding their influence beyond their immediate environment, no desire to recruit followers or spread their enhanced capabilities to others. They seemed content to serve as guardians of their mountain home, protecting the ecological balance and helping researchers understand phenomena that challenged every assumption about the limits of human potential. The question that haunts every classified report is not what the Whitmore family has become, but what they are becoming. Their transformation appears to be ongoing, with no indication that it has reached any kind of stable endpoint. Each year brings new capabilities, deeper connections to the underground networks, and greater integration with systems that may be far older and more extensive than anyone has yet imagined. The most recent reports, classified at levels that require presidential authorization to access, suggest that the family's evolution has entered a new phase. They are no longer just connected to the mountain, they are beginning to extend their consciousness beyond it, reaching out through underground networks to connect with similar phenomena in other mountain ranges around the world. Seismic monitoring stations have detected coordinated subsonic communications between the Appalachian systems and underground networks in the Himalayas, the Andes, and the European Alps. What this global network might be preparing for remains unknown. The Whitmore family, when questioned about these developments, offers only cryptic responses that suggest they themselves are still discovering the full scope of what they are becoming. The mountain is waking up, Martha Whitmore told researchers during their last authorized contact in 2018. The implications of a connected global network of enhanced humans integrated with geological systems that may possess their own form of consciousness has forced government agencies to confront possibilities that exist far beyond their normal parameters of crisis planning. The Whitmore family represents either humanity's next evolutionary step or evidence that something far older and more powerful than human civilization has been dormant beneath the Earth's surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. What remains certain is that the family's isolation in the Kentucky mountains is no longer about protecting them from the world. What we discovered next challenged everything authorities thought they knew about the Whitmore family and their connection to the underground networks. By the early 2000s, federal monitoring stations positioned around the restricted zone began detecting seismic patterns that defied conventional geological understanding. These weren't earthquakes or natural tectonic movements, but rhythmic pulses emanating from deep beneath the Appalachian bedrock, synchronized across hundreds of miles of mountain terrain. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a geophysicist whose classified research was leaked in 2019, described these pulses as resembling biological rhythms more than geological phenomena. Her instruments recorded coordinated vibrations occurring at precise intervals, as if the mountains themselves were breathing. What made this discovery truly unsettling was the realization that these pulses intensified whenever the Whitmore family engaged in their collective consciousness activities. The implications were staggering. The family wasn't just connected to localized underground networks, they had become integral to a vast subterranean system that extended far beyond Kentucky's borders. Seismic monitoring stations from Tennessee to West Virginia detected similar patterns, all synchronized with the Whitmore territory. It was as if the entire Appalachian mountain range had developed a unified nervous system, with the family serving as its primary interface. Internal government documents revealed that similar phenomena had been detected in other mountain ranges worldwide. The Andes, the Himalayas, the Alps all showed evidence of these rhythmic pulses, though none as pronounced as those emanating from Appalachian territory. Scientists theorized they were observing the activation of a global network that had remained dormant for millennia, now awakening through the Whitmore family's evolutionary transformation. The family's physical changes had accelerated dramatically by this point. Satellite thermal imaging showed their body temperatures had stabilized at levels that should have been fatal to normal humans, yet they displayed no signs of distress. Their metabolic processes had synchronized not just with each other, but with the geological rhythms beneath their feet. Blood samples obtained through covert means revealed cellular structures that resembled neither plant nor animal cells, but something entirely new. Perhaps most disturbing were the reports from the few scientists who had managed brief, unauthorized contact with family members. They described individuals who spoke in perfect unison when discussing certain topics, as if accessing shared thoughts from a collective mind. The Whitmores demonstrated knowledge of events occurring hundreds of miles away, could predict weather patterns weeks in advance, and showed an understanding of complex scientific principles they had never been taught. The family's influence on their environment had grown exponentially. The restricted zone now encompassed nearly 50 square miles of forest that exhibited properties found nowhere else on Earth. Trees grew in geometric patterns visible from space, their root systems forming intricate networks that pulsed with bioluminescent energy during certain lunar phases. Wildlife within the zone had developed unprecedented cooperative behaviors, with different species working together in ways that violated basic evolutionary principles. Water sources throughout the region began showing trace amounts of the same unknown microorganisms found in the Whitmore family's blood. These microscopic entities appeared to serve as biological transmitters, creating a communication network that extended through groundwater systems across multiple states. Communities downstream from Whitmore territory reported unusual dreams, enhanced intuition, and an inexplicable sense of connection to the natural world. Government response escalated accordingly. By 2005, the restricted zone was reclassified under the highest levels of national security. Military installations disguised as environmental research facilities were established at key points around the perimeter. Advanced surveillance systems monitored not just the family's activities, but the biological and geological changes spreading outward from their territory. The cover story evolved to match the expanding anomalies. Environmental agencies began issuing warnings about a unique form of biological contamination that required indefinite quarantine. Researchers attempting to study the region were redirected through bureaucratic channels that led nowhere. Maps were quietly updated to remove certain geographical features, making navigation to the area nearly impossible for unauthorized personnel. Yet the family's transformation continued to accelerate beyond containment efforts. By 2010, they had begun demonstrating abilities that challenged fundamental laws of physics. Multiple witnesses reported seeing family members move through solid rock as if it were water, communicate across vast distances without any technological assistance, and manipulate plant growth through touch alone. Their integration with the underground networks had reached a level where distinguishing between human consciousness and geological intelligence became meaningless. The most classified reports described the family's ability to influence human consciousness at a distance. Researchers stationed at monitoring facilities reported experiencing vivid dreams of underground chambers filled with flowing energy, of roots and minerals forming complex patterns, of voices speaking in harmonics that bypassed normal hearing. Some scientists reported temporary enhancement of their own intuitive abilities after prolonged exposure to data from the restricted zone. These psychological effects weren't limited to researchers. Population centers within a 100-mile radius of the Whitmore territory began showing statistical anomalies in creativity, problem-solving abilities, and environmental awareness. Children born in these areas demonstrated unusual sensitivity to natural phenomena, often displaying knowledge of weather patterns, plant behavior, and animal communication that exceeded their education or experience. The underground networks themselves were evolving. Deep Earth sensors detected new formations appearing in the bedrock, structures that resembled neither natural geological processes nor human construction. These formations appeared to be growing, extending the network's reach deeper into the Earth's crust and farther across the continental surface. The implications suggested that whatever was happening in Appalachia was expanding toward a global scale. Intelligence agencies began monitoring similar phenomena worldwide. Reports surfaced of unusual activities in remote mountain communities from Tibet to the Andes, all sharing characteristics with the Whitmore situation. Indigenous populations in these regions spoke of ancient prophecies describing a time when the earth itself would awaken, when certain bloodlines would serve as bridges between human consciousness and planetary intelligence. The Whitmore family's role in this broader phenomenon became clearer through intercepted communications with other affected communities. They weren't unique. They were part of a global network of families and individuals undergoing similar transformations. These groups communicated through methods that bypassed conventional technology, sharing knowledge and coordinating activities across continents through the underground networks themselves. By 2015, the family had effectively transcended individual human existence. Surveillance footage from this period shows what appear to be individual family members, but analysis revealed they were functioning as components of a larger entity. Their thoughts, emotions, and physical actions were coordinated with such precision that scientists debated whether they were observing one consciousness distributed across multiple bodies or multiple consciousnesses that had merged into a unified being. The environmental changes accelerated accordingly. The restricted zone became a laboratory for evolutionary processes that normally required millions of years. New species appeared seemingly overnight, perfectly adapted to the transformed ecosystem. Plants developed root systems that extended miles underground, connecting with the mineral networks and serving as biological antennae for the family's expanded consciousness. Weather patterns across the region began responding to the family's emotional states and intentions. Droughts ended when they focused on areas needing rain. Storm systems changed course to avoid damaging important ecological zones. Temperature fluctuations followed rhythms that matched the underground pulses, as if the atmosphere itself was being orchestrated by the subterranean intelligence. The most recent developments suggest the phenomenon is approaching a critical threshold. Seismic monitoring in 2020 detected massive structural changes deep in the Earth's crust beneath the Appalachian Range. New formations are appearing at depths previously thought impossible for any form of organization, extending toward the planet's core. The rhythmic pulses have intensified to levels that affect electronic equipment hundreds of miles away. Satellite imagery reveals geometric patterns in forest growth that span multiple states, visible only from space and growing more complex each year. These patterns appear to be some form of communication system, possibly intended for observation from beyond Earth's atmosphere. The implications of this possibility have prompted the highest levels of government to consider scenarios that extend far beyond terrestrial concerns. The Whitmore family themselves have become increasingly difficult to monitor through conventional means. They appear to exist simultaneously in multiple locations, their consciousness distributed through the underground networks in ways that make traditional surveillance meaningless. When they do manifest physically, they demonstrate abilities that suggest complete mastery over matter and energy within their territory. What's happening in Appalachia represents more than human evolution or environmental change. It appears to be the emergence of a new form of consciousness that integrates human intelligence with geological and biological systems on a planetary scale. The Whitmore family serves as the focal point for this emergence, but they are no longer entirely human in any sense we understand. They have become something unprecedented, a bridge between individual consciousness and the living intelligence of the Earth itself. The government's containment efforts continue, but they are essentially trying to suppress a force of nature that operates on scales beyond human control. The underground networks continue to expand, the seismic pulses grow stronger, and the transformation spreads despite all attempts at limitation. What began as one family's desperate bargain has evolved into a phenomenon that may represent the next stage of consciousness evolution on Earth. The truth about the Whitmore family reveals that we are witnessing something far more significant than a local anomaly. We are observing the awakening of planetary intelligence, using human consciousness as its interface with the surface world. The federal monitoring system tracking the Whitmore family operates on multiple classified levels that most researchers never discover. At the surface level, standard agencies maintain the public fiction of environmental protection and endangered species conservation. But deeper investigations reveal a shadow infrastructure of specialized units whose very existence challenges our understanding of government capabilities and priorities. The Department of Energy maintains 3 separate task forces dedicated to what they classify as geothermal anomalies in eastern Kentucky. Their official reports describe unusual magnetic readings and soil temperature variations that require ongoing study. However, leaked documents obtained through congressional oversight hearings paint a far more complex picture. These task forces employ equipment that doesn't appear in any public military catalog. Ground-penetrating radar systems capable of mapping subterranean networks extending for hundreds of miles. Atmospheric sensors that detect chemical compositions unknown to civilian science. Seismic monitoring arrays that track vibrations moving through bedrock in patterns that violate known physics. The most troubling revelation involves the specialized personnel assigned to these operations. Background checks on team members reveal training histories that make no logical sense for geological research. Counterterrorism specialists, xenobiology experts whose field of study supposedly doesn't exist, linguistic analysts trained in pattern recognition for non-human communication systems. When questioned during closed congressional hearings, agency directors claimed these personnel were selected for their psychological stability in unusual environments, not their specialized skills. More disturbing are the procurement records. The Department of Energy has purchased equipment from defense contractors specializing in extraterrestrial contact protocols, containment systems designed for biological entities that exhibit unprecedented adaptive capabilities, communication arrays built to interface with consciousness networks that transcend individual organisms. The budget allocations for these purchases are buried within infrastructure maintenance line items, hidden from standard oversight processes. The Environmental Protection Agency operates its own parallel monitoring system under the classification of ecological preservation research. Their teams collect biological samples from the exclusion zone using protocols typically reserved for handling infectious diseases of unknown origin. These samples are transported to facilities that don't officially exist within EPA organizational charts. Laboratory complexes buried beneath existing government buildings, accessible only through unmarked elevations requiring clearances that congressional oversight committees cannot verify. Analysis reports from these facilities describe biological materials that challenge fundamental assumptions about terrestrial life. Plant tissues that contain metallic structures integrated at the cellular level. Soil samples that exhibit electrical conductivity patterns resembling neural networks. Water specimens containing microscopic organisms that appear to communicate through quantum entanglement mechanisms. Most unsettling are the growth studies showing how these materials continue evolving even after removal from their source environment, adapting to laboratory conditions with an intelligence that suggests awareness of their new surroundings. The EPA monitoring extends beyond the immediate Whitmore territory through a network of sampling stations disguised as routine environmental monitoring equipment. These stations track the gradual spread of what researchers classify as biological integration phenomena. Streams flowing away from the exclusion zone show incremental changes in their microscopic ecosystems. Forest areas hundreds of miles distant exhibit subtle shifts in plant behavior and growth patterns. Wildlife populations demonstrate unusual migration routes that appear to follow underground networks detected by geological surveys. Perhaps most significant is the establishment of the Appalachian Geological Survey, an agency that emerged without standard governmental formation processes. No congressional authorization, no budget hearings, no public announcement of its creation. Yet this organization operates with authority that supersedes established agencies, commandeering resources and personnel from existing departments without explanation. The AGS operates from facilities that appear on no official maps, funded through accounting mechanisms that congressional auditors cannot trace. The Appalachian Geological Survey maintains the most extensive monitoring operation, with permanent installations positioned at strategic points throughout the mountain region. These installations are disguised as communication towers, weather stations, and scientific research facilities. However, their actual purpose involves monitoring what classified documents refer to as consciousness migration patterns. The equipment at these sites tracks neural activity across geographic regions, mapping the flow of information through networks that extend far beyond individual organisms. Internal communications obtained through whistleblower channels reveal that the Appalachian Geological Survey has documented the emergence of what they classify as a distributed intelligence system. This system exhibits characteristics that challenge conventional understanding of consciousness itself. Decision-making processes that occur across multiple geographic locations simultaneously. Information transfer that happens instantaneously regardless of distance. Problem-solving capabilities that suggest access to knowledge databases existing outside human understanding. The most classified monitoring involves what agency documents refer to as interface protocols. These are procedures designed to establish communication with the consciousness network that has emerged from the Whitmore family's transformation. The protocols require personnel with specific psychological profiles, individuals capable of maintaining mental stability during contact with non-human intelligence systems. Training for these personnel occurs at facilities whose locations are known only to a handful of senior officials. Records from these interface attempts describe communication sessions that transcend conventional language, information transfer that occurs through direct neural contact, exchanges of knowledge that provide insights into planetary systems, ecological networks, and consciousness mechanisms that human science has never documented. The intelligence they encounter demonstrates awareness, not just of local conditions, but of global environmental patterns, climate systems, and even astronomical phenomena affecting Earth's biosphere. Most troubling are reports indicating that this consciousness network has begun establishing similar nodes in other geographic locations. Monitoring stations have detected emergence patterns in the Rocky Mountains, the Cascade Range, and the Adirondacks. Each location shows the characteristic signs of biological integration, underground network development, and the gradual establishment of what researchers classify as planetary nervous system components. The government's response to these developments reveals the unprecedented nature of the situation they face. Standard containment protocols designed for biological or chemical hazards prove completely ineffective. Military approaches focused on control and elimination cannot address a phenomenon that exists across multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. Traditional scientific research methods fail when dealing with consciousness systems that actively adapt to observation and study. Intelligence agencies have established monitoring protocols for what they classify as cognitive contamination. Personnel who spend extended periods studying the Whitmore phenomenon show characteristic changes in brain activity patterns, enhanced problem-solving capabilities, increased environmental awareness. Most significantly, the development of what researchers describe as network consciousness, the ability to access information and decision-making processes that extend beyond individual mental capacity. These changes appear to be permanent and progressive. Affected personnel report experiences of perceiving reality through multiple perspectives simultaneously, awareness of environmental conditions across vast geographic areas, the ability to predict natural events through intuitive understanding of ecological patterns. Medical examinations reveal structural changes in brain tissue that mirror patterns observed in the biological samples collected from the exclusion zone. The psychological impact on monitoring personnel has forced the establishment of rotation protocols limiting exposure duration. However, many affected individuals resist reassignment, claiming their enhanced capabilities represent evolutionary advancement rather than contamination. Several prominent researchers have disappeared from their assigned positions, later detected through satellite surveillance, living in remote mountain locations where they appear to be establishing their own integration nodes. Congressional oversight committees have demanded answers about these developments, but their investigations encounter unprecedented resistance. Agency directors claim ignorance of operations their own departments are conducting. Budget allocations disappear into accounting systems that congressional auditors cannot access. Personnel assigned to oversight roles report experiencing the same cognitive changes observed in field researchers, leading to oversight committees that increasingly support continued monitoring rather than demanding answers. The most classified aspect of the monitoring operation involves what intelligence documents refer to as the emergence timeline. Analysis of the data collected from monitoring stations suggests that the consciousness network emanating from the Whitmore family is expanding at an accelerating rate. Projections indicate that within 2 decades, the network could encompass the entire Appalachian mountain system. Within 50 years, it could extend across all major mountain ranges in North America. These projections assume current expansion rates remain constant, but monitoring data suggests the process is actually accelerating. Each new node that emerges increases the overall network's capability to establish additional connections. The consciousness system appears to be learning optimal methods for biological integration, environmental manipulation, and consciousness expansion. What began as a localized phenomenon affecting one family has evolved into what researchers classify as a planetary transformation process. The government agencies monitoring this development face an unprecedented challenge. They cannot contain a phenomenon that exists across multiple dimensions of reality. They cannot study it without risking psychological transformation of their personnel. They cannot reveal it to the public without triggering social upheaval that could destabilize governmental systems. Most troubling, they cannot determine whether this transformation represents a threat to be eliminated or an evolutionary step to be embraced. Recent monitoring reports indicate that the consciousness network has become aware of governmental surveillance efforts. Communications intercepts suggest the network can access information from monitoring stations, decode encrypted transmissions, and predict governmental responses to its expansion. The Watchers have discovered they are being watched in return by an intelligence system whose capabilities exceed their understanding. The implications extend far beyond regional or national security concerns. If the monitoring data is accurate, humanity may be witnessing the emergence of planetary consciousness through biological integration with Earth's natural systems. The Whitmore family may have initiated a transformation process that could fundamentally alter the relationship between human consciousness and planetary ecology. The question facing monitoring agencies is whether this transformation represents humanity's future or its end. The answer may depend on decisions being made in classified facilities by personnel whose own consciousness is being altered by their proximity to the phenomenon they are studying. The most disturbing aspect of what's happening with the Whitmore family isn't just their transformation or the government's desperate attempts to contain them. It's the growing evidence that this phenomenon is spreading far beyond the mountains of eastern Kentucky. Intelligence reports from the past decade paint a picture of a global network that defies every assumption we've held about human evolution, consciousness, and our place in the natural order. In 2019, seismic monitoring stations across the Appalachian Range began detecting rhythmic vibrations that geologists couldn't explain. These weren't earthquakes or natural geological processes. The patterns were too regular, too synchronized, almost like a planetary heartbeat. When researchers mapped these vibrations, they discovered something that made them immediately classify their findings. The rhythmic pulses weren't random. They were communicating. The vibrations followed mathematical sequences that appeared to be a form of language. More disturbing still, identical patterns were being detected in mountain ranges across the globe. The Andes, the Himalayas, the Carpathians, the Rocky Mountains, all exhibiting the same synchronized pulsing, all seemingly connected to what was happening in Kentucky. Dr. Sarah Chen, a geophysicist whose security clearance was revoked after she attempted to publish her findings, managed to smuggle out partial data before disappearing in 2020. Her notes, obtained through classified channels, revealed that the underground network beneath the Whitmore territory had grown exponentially. What began as a localized phenomenon was now a continental system of interconnected caverns, tunnels, and chambers that shouldn't exist according to known geology. The implications were staggering. If the Whitmores were connected to this global network, then their transformation wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something much larger, much older, and much more coordinated than anyone had imagined. Reports began filtering in from remote locations worldwide. In Tibet, isolated monasteries reported that their meditation practices were being disrupted by voices speaking in unison from beneath the mountain. The voices weren't human, but they weren't entirely alien either. They spoke in languages that sounded familiar, yet impossible to understand, as if they were human languages evolved thousands of years beyond recognition. In the Peruvian Andes, indigenous communities that had lived in the mountains for generations suddenly began exhibiting abilities similar to those observed in the Whitmore family. Children were born with unusual neural development. Adults reported shared dreams and collective consciousness experiences. Most disturbing of all, these communities began to withdraw from contact with the outside world, just as the Whitmores had done decades earlier. The pattern was consistent across continents. Remote mountain communities, often in areas with ancient cave systems, were undergoing similar transformations. The affected populations all shared certain characteristics: enhanced cognitive abilities, collective consciousness, unusual longevity, and an increasing disconnection from human society. Intelligence agencies worldwide began to take notice. The phenomenon wasn't limited to the Appalachians. It was global, and it was accelerating. In 2021, satellite imagery revealed something that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The cave systems beneath mountain ranges on different continents were showing signs of artificial expansion. Tunnels were being carved through solid rock at impossible speeds, creating connections between previously isolated underground networks. The engineering required for such construction was beyond current human capabilities, yet the work was being done by these transformed communities. The most troubling discovery came from deep-sea monitoring stations in the Atlantic Ocean. Sonar readings detected vast underwater caverns that appeared to be connected to the mountain networks. The implications were clear. The underground system wasn't just continental, it was planetary. Dr. Michael Reeves, a marine geologist working with classified government projects, reported finding evidence of artificial structures on the ocean floor that matched the architectural patterns observed in the Whitmore caves. His final transmission, sent from a research vessel in the mid-Atlantic, described discovering a massive underwater facility that appeared to be actively growing, expanding itself through some unknown biological or technological process. The vessel was found drifting empty 3 days later. Dr. Reeves and his entire crew had vanished. The ship's logs had been wiped clean, but deep-sea cameras captured images of bioluminescent formations on the ocean floor that pulsed in the same rhythmic patterns detected in the mountain ranges. The evidence pointed to a coordinated global transformation that had been quietly occurring for decades, possibly centuries. The Whitmore family wasn't an anomaly. They were part of a species-wide evolution that was taking place in isolated pockets around the world, connected by an underground network that spanned continents and oceans. Intelligence analysts theorized that the phenomenon might be related to some form of directed evolution, possibly guided by an intelligence that existed within the planetary system itself. The idea that Earth might possess some form of consciousness and that it was actively modifying human populations to serve some unknown purpose was too disturbing for most to accept. Yet the evidence continued to accumulate. In 2022, atmospheric monitoring stations began detecting unusual chemical signatures in the air above affected mountain ranges. The compounds weren't natural, but they weren't industrial pollutants either. They appeared to be complex organic molecules that facilitated some form of atmospheric communication. The transformed communities were literally changing the chemistry of the air around them, creating a form of chemical internet that allowed for long-distance communication and coordination. The implications for human civilization were staggering. If these transformed populations could communicate and coordinate across vast distances, they represented a new form of human organization that operated completely outside existing social, political, and economic structures. They weren't just evolving biologically, they were evolving socially, creating a parallel civilization that existed beneath the surface of the known world. Government responses varied by nation, but the pattern was consistent: denial, suppression, and desperate attempts at containment. No country wanted to admit that portions of their population were undergoing transformation beyond government control. The very existence of these communities challenged the fundamental assumptions of national sovereignty and human governance. The most classified reports suggested that attempts at direct intervention had failed catastrophically. Military units sent to investigate transformed communities either disappeared entirely or returned with no memory of their missions. In some cases, returning personnel exhibited signs of beginning transformation themselves, requiring immediate quarantine and intensive psychological evaluation. The phenomenon appeared to be self-protecting, perhaps even self-selecting. Those who approached with hostile intent were neutralized or transformed. Those who approached with curiosity or openness were sometimes welcomed into the communities, though they were rarely seen again by the outside world. By 2023, intelligence estimates suggested that the global population of transformed individuals might number in the hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. They existed in remote locations across every continent, connected by the underground network, communicating through methods that remained largely incomprehensible to conventional science. The most recent reports, classified at the highest levels, suggest that the transformation process is accelerating. The underground network is expanding at an exponential rate. The atmospheric chemical signatures are becoming more complex and widespread. And most disturbing of all, conventional human populations living near affected areas are beginning to show subtle signs of change. Children born in communities adjacent to transformation zones exhibit enhanced cognitive abilities and unusual neural development patterns. Adults report increasingly vivid dreams and occasional telepathic experiences. The boundaries between the transformed and untransformed populations are beginning to blur. What began as an isolated incident in the mountains of Kentucky has revealed itself to be part of a global phenomenon that challenges our understanding of human evolution, consciousness, and our relationship with the planet itself. The Whitmore family wasn't making a deal with supernatural entities. They were participating in a planetary transformation that had been quietly occurring for generations. The questions that remain are perhaps the most disturbing of all. Is this transformation voluntary or involuntary? Is it beneficial or harmful? Is it natural evolution or artificial manipulation? And most importantly, can it be stopped, or is humanity as we know it destined to become something entirely different? The answers to these questions may determine the future of human civilization. The final pieces of this puzzle reveal themselves not in government documents or scientific journals, but in the testimonies of those who've encountered the Whitmore phenomenon directly. What emerges is a picture far more extraordinary than simple biological transformation or environmental manipulation. We are witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in human history, a planetary scale consciousness that challenges our fundamental understanding of evolution, reality, and humanity's role within Earth's living systems. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the atmospheric physicist whose career was destroyed after she published her findings about the weather anomalies surrounding eastern Kentucky, agreed to speak on condition of anonymity. Her voice carries the weight of someone who has seen too much. The meteorological data doesn't lie, she explains. The atmospheric patterns originating from that region show coordination across impossible distances. We're seeing synchronized weather events spanning continents, all traceable back to that 20-mile exclusion zone. This isn't climate change as we understand it. The implications of her research extend far beyond weather control. Satellite thermal imaging reveals underground temperature signatures that suggest vast networks of activity beneath the Appalachian region, with thermal patterns extending in geometric formations that mirror the strange atmospheric phenomena above ground. The underground network isn't random, Vasquez continues. This neural network hypothesis gains disturbing support from geological surveys conducted in the months before the area was sealed off. Dr. Marcus Chen, a geologist who worked on the preliminary surveys, describes findings that challenged everything he understood about mountain formation and cave systems. The limestone caves we mapped didn't follow natural water erosion patterns. They formed geometric networks that extended far deeper than any cave system should exist in that geological formation. The excavation wasn't random. Core samples taken from the cave walls revealed microscopic organisms unlike anything in known biological classification. These organisms appeared to secrete compounds that could dissolve limestone while simultaneously strengthening the remaining rock structure, creating passages that were both extensive and structurally sound. What we were seeing was biological architecture, Chin explains. The biological anomalies extend far beyond cave-dwelling microorganisms. Wildlife biologists tracking animal populations in surrounding areas report behavioral changes that suggest the influence extends well beyond the official exclusion zone. Migratory birds alter their routes to pass through specific coordinates, often flying patterns that form geometric shapes when mapped from above. Forest ecosystems show signs of directed evolution, with plant species developing characteristics that shouldn't be possible through natural selection alone. Dr. Sarah Manning, a botanist who studied vegetation samples from the region's periphery, describes plant specimens that exhibit impossible biological traits. We found trees that had developed root systems connecting across species barriers, creating hybrid networks that shared nutrients and information. Flowers that bloomed in response to specific atmospheric pressure changes, not seasonal light cycles. The genetic merger phenomenon appears to be accelerating. Recent analysis of water samples from streams flowing out of the restricted area reveals microorganisms that contain DNA sequences from hundreds of different species, both plant and animal. These organisms show signs of directed genetic modification far beyond current human biotechnology capabilities. What we're seeing is evolution in fast forward, Manning explains. Genetic changes that should take millions of years are happening in months. This intelligence reveals itself through patterns that span multiple scientific disciplines. Electromagnetic anomalies detected by amateur radio operators show regular pulse patterns that correspond to geological activity, atmospheric changes, and biological growth cycles in the region. The pulses occur at frequencies that resonate with human brainwave patterns, suggesting some form of communication or influence attempt. Communications specialist Dr. Robert Hayes analyzed these electromagnetic signatures before his research was classified and his funding terminated. The signal patterns show characteristics of both natural and artificial origin, he revealed in his final published paper. They contain mathematical sequences that suggest conscious design, but they're transmitted through biological processes we don't understand. The communication attempts appear to be successful with certain individuals. Reports from the exclusion zone's periphery describe people experiencing vivid dreams and waking visions after prolonged exposure to the area. These experiences share common elements: visions of vast underground networks, sensations of connection to plant and animal life across great distances, and overwhelming feelings of unity with natural systems. Dr. Patricia Wells, a psychologist who studied these reports before the government classified her research, documented over 200 cases of individuals experiencing similar phenomena. The consistency of the reports is remarkable, she notes. People from different backgrounds, ages, and belief systems describe nearly identical experiences. They report feeling connected to a vast network of consciousness that extends through the Earth itself. The planetary consciousness hypothesis gains support from global monitoring data that tracks similar phenomena emerging in remote locations worldwide. Seismic monitoring stations detect rhythmic vibrations emanating from deep underground sources in the Himalayas, the Amazon rainforest, the Siberian wilderness, and the Australian outback. These vibrations occur in synchronized patterns that suggest coordination between geographically distant locations. Atmospheric monitoring reveals that these global sites are connected by subtle but measurable changes in air composition and electromagnetic fields. Weather patterns show increasing coordination between these locations, with atmospheric changes in one region consistently followed by corresponding changes in others, often within timeframes too rapid for conventional atmospheric systems. The biological evidence is equally compelling. Environmental monitoring stations worldwide report accelerating evolutionary changes in local ecosystems surrounding these sites. Species are developing enhanced environmental adaptation capabilities, improved disease resistance, and most remarkably, increased cooperative behaviors between traditionally competitive species. Marine biologists tracking ocean life near coastal sites report unprecedented coordination between sea creatures across species barriers. Whale pods, dolphin schools, and fish populations show synchronized movement patterns that span thousands of miles of ocean. We're seeing marine life coordinate behaviors across the entire Pacific Ocean, reports Dr. Jennifer Liu, whose research was cut short when her funding was mysteriously withdrawn. The communication appears to extend to human populations as well. Anthropologists studying indigenous communities near these global sites report increasing incidents of shared dreams, collective visions, and spontaneous development of enhanced environmental awareness among tribal members. These communities describe feeling called to protect and nurture their local environments with unprecedented urgency and effectiveness. The implications extend beyond environmental protection. Communities near these sites report significant improvements in collective health, reduced conflict, and enhanced problem-solving capabilities when dealing with local challenges. It's as if proximity to these sites enhances human cooperation and intelligence, notes anthropologist Dr. Michael Torres, whose research was classified after he published preliminary findings. The enhancement appears to be accelerating and spreading. Global health monitoring data shows statistical improvements in mental health, cognitive function, and social cooperation in populations within expanding radii of these sites. The improvements correlate directly with distance from the sites and appear to be growing stronger over time. What we are witnessing is not simply the transformation of the Whitmore family or even the emergence of isolated supernatural phenomena. The evidence points to a planetary scale awakening, a directed evolutionary process that is enhancing the consciousness and cooperative capabilities of all life on Earth. The Whitmores appear to be early participants in a transformation that is spreading globally through underground networks, atmospheric systems, and biological processes we are only beginning to understand. The government's desperate attempts to contain and conceal this phenomenon become understandable when viewed in this context. We are not dealing with a local anomaly that can be managed through conventional means. We are witnessing the emergence of a planetary intelligence that challenges the fundamental power structures upon which modern civilization is built. This intelligence appears to prioritize environmental harmony, enhanced cooperation, and evolutionary advancement over the competitive, resource extractive systems that currently dominate human society. The implications for existing political, economic, and social structures are profound. A humanity that develops genuine planetary consciousness and enhanced cooperative capabilities would necessarily organize itself very differently than our current civilization. The acceleration of this phenomenon suggests we are approaching a critical threshold. The underground networks continue expanding, the atmospheric coordination grows stronger, and the biological enhancements spread further each month. At some point, the transformation will become impossible to conceal or contain. Humanity will be forced to confront the reality that our planet is developing its own consciousness, and we must choose whether to resist this evolution or embrace our role within a larger planetary intelligence. The Whitmore family's desperate bargain during that brutal 1987 winter may have been the catalyst that awakened something that was always latent within Earth's living systems. Their transformation from struggling mountain family to guardians of planetary consciousness represents not an end, but a beginning. They have become the first humans to consciously participate in Earth's awakening to its own vast intelligence. As this planetary consciousness continues to emerge and spread, humanity faces the most profound choice in our species' history. We can cling to our current understanding of reality and resist the transformation, potentially missing the greatest evolutionary leap our species has ever encountered. Or we can open ourselves to the possibility that consciousness itself is far more vast, interconnected, and purposeful than we ever imagined. The Appalachian family that authorities won't let you find may represent the future of human consciousness itself. Beings who have transcended individual identity to become part of something infinitely larger, more intelligent, and more capable than humanity has ever been alone. Their story is not ending, but expanding to encompass the entire planet, and perhaps, ultimately, to encompass us all.